Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. Remember the ArriveCan app? You know, the thing you were supposed to download to your phone and enter all sorts of personal information into, just so that you could re-enter your own country, if you were permitted to leave, of course. Well, putting all the constitutional, moral, and ethical issues aside, the app cost you and me, the taxpayer, $54 million to create. $54 million for a little app? Is that really the going price of an app these days? Well, not according to Lazer Technologies, who spent a weekend recreating the app and estimated the cost to develop and implement it would be only around the $250,000 mark. Well, that's a huge difference. So why did we pay all this money? Was the app really worth the price tag? And how close is this clone to the real deal? Well, joining me now is Zain Manji, head of Toronto-based Lazer Technologies, whose company created the clone. Hi, Zain. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so my burning question here is why did you choose to clone the ArriveCan app?
Initially when we first saw the article about the ArriveCan app costing $54 million, we didn't have any intention to try to clone the app or try to see, what could be done in a short amount of time. We were just initially shocked. And a bunch of people just started asking us, like, hey, how hard is it to actually build this app? Maybe you guys can just create a clone of it within like the weekend or within a week. And we kind of just did it for fun, just to kind of test it out and just kind of point point a light towards the fact that there's a lot of really talented engineering people and designers in Canada that could potentially build an app just like that, for a shorter amount of time and with less resources. So that's kind of why we did it, just to kind of shed some light on that fact, and hopefully it worked.
Okay, so how complicated was it to create the app?
So I think just to clarify, right, when we created the app, we basically just created a clone version of the UI of the app. So that's just like the
The,
actual
the
Android,
user,
iOS app,
the user
the user
interface.
interface of the app.
There we go.
Yes, exactly. So the things that are there's a few things missing in the app. Obviously, it's not connected to government systems or any database that stores or handles information. And to be honest, that is a huge part of the puzzle when creating an app like this. The UI itself is actually probably one of the more simpler things to build. Once you kind of know, and for us, we were just imitating what the app already looked like. So it was very easy for us to say, okay, we need this page, we need this page, this is how this page kind of works. But in the real world, you have to go through like a discovery and a design process to figure out
Right.
what is the right flow for users and then build that out.
Right, and of course, the back end is always where a lot of the headaches are. You discover a lot of headaches when you're again trying to interface in with a government database and whatnot.
Hmm.
So, in that regard, I guess in the user interface component is identical then to the ArriveCan app,
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly identical.
but you just don't have all the back end obviously synchronizing because you're not permitted to.
Yeah, I mean, like, that would be a whole process on its own. We'd have to work with like many different stakeholders within the government, many different data providers. We have to make sure that the app is audited according to privacy standards and it's compliant according to regulations. So obviously, like for us, we're not going to do that, or we can't even get access to that without the right authority. So we just did as much as we could, given the amount of time that we had.
Okay, and so apart from the back end, it is identical. It is exactly similar to the ArriveCan app.
Yep, the user interface.
Okay, and you suggested that this could be done for $250,000. That includes if you were to build out the back end?
I actually never said anything about the cost of it.
Okay, apologize. I referenced some news article that suggested this could be done for about a 250,000.
Yeah, but I don't think us or we said that it could be done for a 250,000. It must have been from a different source.
A consultant. Okay, so how much would it just for the user interface? What would that cost you to build out?
I mean, it for us to build it out, I guess over like the the 2 days or the weekend that we build it out, it would just be a few $1,000s max.
Gotcha.
Nothing more. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to pick up this discussion in just a few moments when we talk about, how functional is this app and did we spend the right amount of money to have it done? We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're discussing the ArriveCan app, and with me is Zain Manji, head of Toronto-based Lazer Technologies, whose company actually cloned the user interface of the ArriveCan app. And thanks again for joining me, Zain. You know, the ArriveCan app created such a divide, even if you will, in Canada. People were either really for or against. It seemed like most people, it didn't matter about your vaccine status, really were annoyed with this app. So I think your company was sort of like this cherry on top of our anger when we found out that, perhaps Canadians overpaid, to the tune of $54 million for this little app when, it perhaps could have been done for a lot cheaper. And we'll get at that into a moment. But when you were creating the app, I know many Canadians were frustrated with the use of it and how functional it was and why they needed all this information. Did you find when you were cloning the user interface there were any deficiencies in the app? What do you think could have been improved upon?
Yeah, you know what? I think, to be honest, the actual UI of the app was very simple. And I think it was designed purposefully to be as simple as possible. Because when you are building an app for the entire country, the last thing you want that app to do is be confusing and hard to use. And so it's really important in that design phase to make sure that, the app is as frictionless as possible. It lets people accomplish the main goal that I guess the app wanted to do, which was, I believe, uploading, your vaccination images and your flight details and generating this QR code that you can share with the border agent.
Hmm.
So there's, if you kind of look at it from that frame, the actual UI itself wasn't really missing anything else. I think, there can be other things that you would wish the app would do, which could have been some additional paperwork that, like, when you cross the border, sometimes you get this paper that tells you whether you need to go in for a random COVID test at that time,
Right.
or whether you can just walk by and not have to do that COVID test. So integrating some of those like features inside of the app would have been nice, but the rules were kind of constantly changing. So it's a bit understandable that you can't just like quickly on the fly upload that sort of feature to the app and expect the general population to understand like how to use it in the best way.
Gotcha. Now, I appreciate that, you can't speak to the federal ArriveCan app and data integrity and things like that, because obviously you didn't create it and you have never access to those back end systems. But in
Mhm.
general, when you're dealing with an app, whether it's a loyalty program app from a supermarket or a drugstore, or maybe an air mile points collection thing where you're uploading your passport number and your legal date of birth and things like that. Where
Mhm.
does all this data go in general when you're dealing with an app like this?
Yeah, so there's whenever you're dealing with an app that handles, let's say, sensitive or private information, um, obviously the data does not get stored on your actual like device. Once you interact with the app, it actually gets sent to servers, which is like either centralized by the government. So the government may have, let's say, servers in a specific area that they control, which is where all the data goes, or they might use a cloud provider like Google Cloud or Amazon AWS to actually store the data. And a lot of apps do this where they store data in the cloud. The most important thing that is kind of needed when you're storing this data is to make sure all of the data is encrypted, all of like the security associated with like the servers and the endpoints in the app are all properly handled. If you're usually dealing with like health information, you have to make sure that your data is compliant with specific rules and regulations like HIPAA or PIPA, depending if you're in the US or in Canada. And there's even other things like different SOC 2 compliances and other things that need to be done to make sure that, you know, like let's say there was a data leak or something like that, that sensitive information about Canadians or citizens doesn't get into the wrong hands. And even if it does get leaked for whatever reason, no one can actually access that data without the appropriate like keys and authorities. So there's a lot of stuff that happens, but they mainly get stored in the cloud normally.
Okay, because we've had a privacy lawyer on the show, and she said that no one should ever upload, their health card information. That is worth so much on the black market as your name, date of birth, and health card. And of
Mhm.
course, if you're uploading, your vaccine certificate or whatever health document you choose to, that would have probably that information. So there were some privacy concerns on that.
Mhm.
Of course, a lot of the Canadian outrage around, I shouldn't say a lot, but many of the Canadian outrage around the ArriveCan was, again, the uploading of personal information. Is it secure? The terms and conditions. Will this be shared? And a lot of Canadians were hesitant with that regard. So we're going to pick up this discussion in just a few moments. Coming back to a point we touched up on before the commercial was obviously the safety. Many Canadians were concerned about the safety. Where is my passport number going to go? Where, if I to generate this QR code, I'm really uploading a lot of personal information: my health card, my date of birth, my name, my passport number. That's a lot of information. My date of travel, point of entry. How can we ever know that this is really secure?
See, yeah, it's tough from an actual consumer or a user standpoint to know whether the data is being handled accordingly. The main thing here is you, like as a user, you have to trust that the actual app is secure and built in the way that none of this data will be leaked, or none of this data, if they were leaked, will actually share the information and making sure everything is encrypted. It's very hard as a consumer to know the truth. The only people that would kind of know the truth are the actual implementers of the app. So that tends to be like the government themselves and the developers behind the system and the architects behind the system. Um, you can do things um, like there's different tests that you can do as a developer to make sure that your endpoints are secure.
Mhm.
But that's kind of all behind the scenes. So you're gonna have to like kind of trust them a little bit.
Okay. Well, I suppose there are many Canadians who use banking apps, for example, but we have heard that there have been some hacks and hacking of information. When we hear of a company that's had its app hacked, that's had its information hacked, doesn't it make it? Well, it makes me as a user a little bit more hesitant, a little more skittish to use an app. How confident should we be as Canadians with our, information security and privacy mainframe we have here?
Yeah, I think as time progresses, it's easier to be um, more trusting that your data is going to be handled securely, right? Like, you know, I think there's something to be said about learning from mistakes that happened in the past. So all of those data leaks that happened in the past are well documented. The actual, let's say, providers that maybe were a part of that data leak learn from those mistakes. They make their systems more secure. Those could be cloud providers. Those could be actual developers or engineers themselves. And so over time, it just gets harder and harder for like data to be leaked over time. So the trust level kind of increases, and I think that that's why even things like crypto and stuff like that is being built, because of all of this sort of centralization that occurs and the trust that you need to have on a specific central party. And if you can kind of control your own data or control how it's used across the whole ecosystem and control who gets access to it, who doesn't, who can see what, that's like a really interesting thing that's developing over time. So um, it's very hard to say. It's either you trust the technology and the people that are building the app, and you choose to trust them oftentimes by opting into using their app in the first place.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to be a little bit in trouble.
Well, and I think that's a very good point. The ArriveCan app, the not your clone, but the government manufactured provided one, had a very thorough terms and conditions to which many
Mhm.
Canadians objected and didn't want to engage with that app to begin with. The potential sharing of information with foreign governments and foreign entities like World Economic Forum, things like that, really took Canadians aback. And some Canadians refused to consent to those terms, and as a result, they might have been grounded in Canada, not able to leave because how would one re-enter? There were obviously massive, hefty fines. Is it common in your experience in app creation? And I don't know if you've had clients, and I know you can't necessarily divulge them, who are governments, but is it normal for governments to collect that data, then to share it with foreign agencies and foreign governments?
I have no idea actually. We've never had a government client, I would say. Yeah, we've never had a government client directly. So um, I have no idea, to be
Now,
honest.
no problem. And now, one thing that just I recall that the ArriveCan app was touted as being the most popular app in Canada at one point because at some point during the app process, apparently it directed you to rate the app, and it was getting such high ratings.
Mm.
Did this surprise you? Did you know about this?
Uh, I actually knew that the app had really, really high ratings. Um, Obviously, I don't know why, like if that's true or if that's not, or how many ratings that is. I never looked at the things, but like to be honest, the actual UI of the app, um, it's pretty clean. Like it's very easy to kind of use because it's so simple on its own. It only like there's only one thing that it tries to help you do, which is basically generate that QR code so you can
Right.
like travel across the border. And because it's so simple, there's less prone to error on the
Right.
actual UI. The design is very clean, it's very simple. And if you kind of catch the people at a right point and ask them to leave a review in a good moment, they're likely to leave a better review anyways. So
Okay.
um,
We've
I'm
got to
not
we've
surprised,
got to cut
but
to commercial
I'm
break, but we'll pick this up in just a moment. Welcome back. I'm joined by Zain Manji, head of Toronto-based Lazer Technologies, whose company cloned the ArriveCan app, and it was a pretty simple process, it sounds like. You did it over a weekend, just, of course, the user interface, not the back end. But that brought up a very interesting point. Could someone theoretically create a clone ArriveCan app and collect all this data and use it for fraudulent purposes? What's preventing people from doing this? If you were able to do it on a weekend, why isn't someone else doing that?
um, anyone can create an app and try to mimic all the behaviors of the app. The very challenging part is distribution of the app. So obviously, once you create an app, you have to get it approved on the actual Apple App Store and the Google Play App Store. And that alone is a process on itself. And so Apple will
Ah,
control who can actually release their app. And look, like when let's say there was like 5 different ArriveCan apps on the App Store, you would see that one was created by the government of Canada and the others were created by random other people. And so naturally you would just think that, the government of Canada app is the correct one and the other ones are more like fraudulent or spam ones. But Apple probably wouldn't let that go through anyways.
they wouldn't authorize it to be available on their marketplace or their platform.
Yeah, they would see that it's like a duplicate or it's kind of like representing some spam like behavior and they would
Right.
probably deny. Yeah.
Ah, okay. So
Yeah.
that's a good form of censorship, then I suppose, to prevent that. Because
Mhm.
it just brought up a good point. Um, okay, so then the crux of the matter. I mean, we're all taxpayers here in Canada, and
Mhm.
COVID has seen unprecedented spending, or I shouldn't say unprecedented, but a lot of spending, and now we have inflation, and interest rates are rising. And then we're looking back at what was left. I know hindsight's 2020, but $54 million for this app. And I know you only did the user interface, and I know you said, or I know somebody said, it wasn't your company, but someone said that it really should, the whole app itself, probably they could do it for about a quarter million. I know it's not your words, someone's words. Do you think the government overpaid for this?
I do think the government overpaid for it. 250K for the app is too low in my opinion. I don't know exactly where the price would land, but the way I think about it is like you break up the actual app development into different components, right? And so the beginning phases is tends to be discovery and user discovery. So that's like working with the different stakeholders to figure out what their requirements are, working with the other different governments and in this case, COVID governing bodies to figure out what their requirements are and then working with like specific Canadians across all different provinces, and then with different like let's say disability needs or accessibility needs, and
Right.
really figuring out what is the actual UI going to look like, and what is the actual experience that you want to offer, and what is the actual goal of the app. And so there's like this discovery process, which takes time. And then after the discovery process, you go into your obviously implementation or execution process, which is building the app and working with the specific government systems that are already into place that either collect the data or use the data or secure the data. And then there's like after the development of the app, there's auditing, so making sure that the app is built correctly, that it's secure, that it's private, it's like compliant with all the different rules and regulations. And then there's distribution of the app, which is like, how do we tell the whole Canadian, country that um, this app is present, this app exists, this is how to use the app. Working with all the border agents to like making sure that they understand what experience is needed. Then there's ongoing maintenance of the app, right? And then
Right.
there's all these other like systems that you're paying for in order to keep the app running. So that could be like the cloud providers or whatever. I don't think it should cost $54 million. You know, it definitely costs a few $1 million, but um, I just think that there's some like inefficiencies with how the app was built, and I won't know what those inefficiencies are without obviously diving really deep and like looking back into history and seeing what was done, what was pivoted, what was time wasted, all that kind of stuff. But
Wow.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
definitely, I think it was the first time I think a government app has been used to such a degree
Mhm.
in Canada for certain, perhaps in the Western world. I don't know anybody else who had an ArriveCan app used to enter their country. So that was definitely a steep learning curve, but an interesting experiment and a costly one, and one that I wasn't happy with. But listen, Zane, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights, and all the best to you and your company. And who knows, maybe you'll land the next COVID app too contract. Who
Mhm.
knows? Well, I certainly learned a lot about app development and what went into probably creating the ArriveCan app here in Canada. It was loved, it was hated, probably mostly hated, but at the end of the day, it was a very expensive app, and I think most of us are glad to be done with that. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick Allen.